The first thing Dario Reyes did after dropping his bag in his new dormitory room was check if his portable burner still worked. It clicked on. The small blue flame held steady. He nodded, packed it back into its case, and went to find the cafeteria. Orin 7 Academy was not big the way universities back on Earth were big. It was big the way a small moon was big. Someone had hollowed it out and filled it with corridors, lecture halls, observation decks, and beings from 30 different star systems. The ceilings were tall. The light was cold and blue. Everything smelled like recycled air and pressed metal. Dario was one of 3 humans enrolled that semester. He had heard the other 2 had already found each other. He had not gone looking for them yet. The cafeteria sat on the 4th level. It was a wide-open room with long tables and no particular order to anything. Aliens of every shape sat in their own quiet clusters. Some ate things that still moved on the plate. Some did not eat at all and simply sat still, absorbing what they needed through their skin or the air around them. Dario did not stare. He had done his reading before arriving. He picked up a tray from the dispenser, looked at the gray paste and 2 yellow cubes the machine produced, then calmly reached under his jacket and pulled out a small zip bag of dried pasta, a tin of crushed tomatoes, and a folded cloth holding 3 cloves of garlic. He set the portable burner on the edge of the tray, clicked it on, put his small travel pot over the flame, and poured in water from his bottle. The smell of garlic hitting hot oil reached the surrounding tables before the pasta even went in. Heads turned. Compound eyes. Stalked eyes. Eyes with 3 irises. All of them turned toward the end of that long table where one human sat over a tiny flame, stirring something in a pot no bigger than a bowl. A variety student named Rekha sat 3 seats down. He was broad, gray-skinned, with a flat nose and a voice built for giving orders. He watched Dario for a moment, then made a sound that his translator rendered as a short laugh. "The human is heating his fuel," Rekha said, loud enough for the whole table to hear. "Is that a custom? Do they perform ceremonies before consuming?" A few aliens laughed. A Tulvari student named Sara, sitting across from Rekha, covered her mouth with 2 of her 4 fingers and looked away, shoulders shaking. Dario stirred the garlic. He added the tomatoes. He dropped the pasta in when the water came to a boil. "It smells strange," said someone further down. "It smells burnt," said someone else. "It smells like a biological error," Rekha said, and the table laughed again. Dario said nothing. He watched the pasta. He checked the texture with a fork after 8 minutes, pulled the pot off the flame, drained it through a small mesh he had folded into his kit, and mixed everything together. He shook a little dried chili on top, because his grandmother had always said food with no heat was food with no opinion. He ate. It was not the best pasta he had ever made. The garlic had been sitting in the bag for 2 weeks. The tomatoes were from a tin. The chili had lost some of its edge, but it was warm and real, and it tasted like something he recognized. Around him, the cafeteria had mostly gone back to its own business. Rekha had turned away. Sara was talking to someone beside her. The noise of 30 species eating and talking and existing filled the room again. Dario wound the last of the pasta onto his fork. At the far end of the hall, near the wall, a small Selene student sat alone. She was pale green, thin-limbed, and young-looking, even by Selene standards. She had not laughed when Rekha laughed. She had not looked away when the others looked away. She was still watching Dario. Not with disgust, not with mockery, with something closer to the way a person looks at a door they are not sure they are allowed to open. Dario noticed her. He did not wave or nod. He simply finished his meal, cleaned his pot, packed everything back into its bag, and stood up with his tray. He did not know her name yet. He did not know that she was called Tavi, or that she had never in her life smelled anything being cooked, or that the scent of garlic and tomato had done something to her that she would spend the next 3 days trying to understand. He just knew she had been watching. And that, for now, was enough. 3 days into the semester, Counselor Bravek walked into the xenobiology seminar with a data slate under his arm and the look of someone who had already decided how the next hour was going to go. Bravek was Tulvari, old Tulvari, the kind that had been teaching at Orange 7 for longer than most of the enrolled species had held interstellar travel. His skin was the dull gray of old stone. His eyes were a flat, pale silver. He spoke slowly on purpose, as if every word he used was a favor he was granting the room. He pulled up the first display on the seminar wall. It was a chart, Biological energy expenditure across species, sorted from most efficient to least. Humans were at the bottom. We begin today, Bravex said, with a practical case study in biological dependency. The human species presents an unusual example of nutritional inefficiency that remains, even now, worth examining. Dario sat in the third row. He had his notebook open. He kept his face still. Bravek tapped the chart. The human digestive system requires a preparatory process before consumption. They apply thermal energy to their food. This process, which they call cooking, adds between 20 and 40 minutes to every meal cycle and consumes additional fuel resources with each occurrence. He paused. No species at this academic level maintains such a dependency. It is, in the clearest terms, a primitive holdover. Someone in the back of the room made a sound. Not a full laugh. Something between a laugh and an agreement. Dario wrote the word primitive in his notebook and underlined it once. Bravek continued. He showed a second chart. Caloric processing efficiency. Humans scored low there too, by the metrics the chart used. He explained that the act of cooking had originally helped early humans survive by breaking down toxins and improving digestibility, but that this was no longer necessary given modern food science, and that the persistence of the habit in human culture was largely sentimental rather than functional. A Graylon student in the far left seat wrote something on his own slate. His name was Nith. He was thin even by Graylon standards, with a long neck and 4 fingers on each hand, and he had a habit of tilting his head slightly to the left when something in the data did not match what he expected. He tilted his head now. He did not say anything. After the seminar ended, the other students filed out in their small clusters. Dario was putting his notebook away when Reka stepped in front of his desk. Reka was not in the seminar. He had been waiting in the corridor and walked in as the room cleared. Counselor Bravek is correct, Reka said. I have been saying the same since you arrived. Your food rituals are a waste of time and energy. They are the habits of something that has not yet finished developing. Dario looked at him. Okay, he said. Reka waited for more. He did not get more. He made a short sound of irritation and left. Dario walked back to his dormitory, sat on his bunk, and stared at the ceiling for a while. The ceiling was metal and offered no advice. He called home. His grandmother answered on the second signal. She was in her kitchen, the way she always was at that hour. He could see the old yellow tiles behind her on the screen. He could see the pot on the stove. He told her what Bravek had said. He told her what Reka had said. He kept his voice even. She listened. She stirred whatever was in the pot without looking away from him. When he finished, she said, "Are you hungry?" He said, "A little." She said, "Then cook something. Not for them. Cook something that makes you feel like you are still yourself." He stayed on the call for another 10 minutes. She told him about the neighbor's cat that had gotten into her herb garden again. She told him the weather had been warm. She told him she had made his grandfather's lamb recipe the Sunday before and that it had come out almost right. Not quite, but almost. When the call ended, Dario sat quietly for a moment. Then he got up, went to the shared dormitory kitchen at the end of the hall, and stood in it for a while with the lights off, just thinking. He had brought lamb from the frozen stores he had shipped ahead. He had dried herbs. He had time. He had the recipe in his head the way his grandmother had put it there, repeated slowly over many years until it no longer needed to be said out loud to be heard. He turned the light on. He had a full weekend ahead. He decided he was going to use it. It started with the onions. Dario cut them slow, the way his grandmother had shown him. Not rushed, not sloppy. The knife went through clean, and the pieces fell even. He put them in the pot with oil over a low flame and let them go soft before adding anything else. That was the part most people skipped. That was the part that mattered. The dormitory kitchen was a narrow room at the end of the hall on floor 6. It had 2 burners built for the general use of 22 different species, which meant they were adjustable but basic. Dario had brought his own heavy-bottomed pot. It fit the burner well enough. He browned the lamb in batches. He did not crowd the pan. His grandmother's voice was in his head. If you crowd the pan, it steams instead of sears, and then you have boiled meat, and nobody wants boiled meat. He listened to that voice the way he always had. The meat went in brown and came out darker. The smell of it filled the small kitchen immediately. Then he added the tomatoes. Then the spices. Cumin, coriander, a little cinnamon, dried chili, black pepper. He stirred it all together, added water, put the lid on, and turned the flame low. The stew needed at least 2 hours. He had time. He started on the flatbread. Flour, water, salt, a small amount of oil. He worked the dough by hand until it had the right give to it. His grandmother's hands had always known before his did. His were learning still. He did not notice when the smell left the kitchen. But the ventilation system on floor 6 was connected to the main air circulation of the entire dormitory wing. It had never mattered before. No one on floor 6 had ever produced a smell that needed to go anywhere. The alien food that the other students consumed came pre-processed, compressed, temperature neutral. It had no smell to speak of. Human and lamb had plenty to speak of. In room 12, a Tulvari student lifted her head from her textbook and looked at the wall for no reason she could name. Her mouth produced more moisture than usual. She told herself it was stress-related and went back to reading. She read the same sentence 4 times. In the common lounge, 2 Graylon students stopped their conversation at the same moment, looked at each other, and said nothing. One of them turned his head toward the corridor. Then he turned back. Then he turned toward the corridor again. In room 9, Sarah put down her data slate. She had been doing coursework for the last 3 hours, and she was not hungry. She was not hungry at all. She was certain of this. She stood up anyway and walked to her door and opened it because she wanted air. That was all. She just wanted air. The smell in the corridor was thick and warm and deeply confusing to her. There was no word in the Tulvari language for what it was doing to her. She stood in the doorway for a long moment. Then she walked slowly toward the end of the hall, stopped outside the kitchen door, and stood there. She stood there for 20 minutes. She did not open the door. She told herself she was waiting for the corridor temperature to normalize. She stood with her arms crossed and her face arranged in its usual expression, which was one of mild and permanent disapproval. Then the kitchen door opened. Dario came out to refill his water bottle at the hall dispenser. He saw Sarah standing 2 steps from the kitchen door. They looked at each other. "The ventilation is malfunctioning," Sarah said. "Okay," Dario said. He refilled his bottle and went back inside. A few minutes later, a knock came at the kitchen door. Soft, uncertain, not Sarah's knock. Sarah would not have knocked that way. Dario opened the door. A small Selene student stood in the corridor. Pale green, thin arms, large dark eyes that were currently fixed on the pot on the burner behind him, as if it were the most interesting thing she had ever encountered in her life. Tavi. He recognized her from the cafeteria on the first day. "Can I watch?" she said, very quietly, like she was expecting to be told no. Dario stepped back from the door. "Come in," he said. She came in. She sat on the small bench near the wall and folded her hands in her lap and watched him stir the stew and roll the flatbread flat and press it onto the dry pan. She did not speak. He did not force conversation. When the bread was done, he put a piece on a small plate, ladled a careful amount of stew beside it, and set it in front of her. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she tore a piece of bread, pressed it into the stew, and put it in her mouth. She was quiet for a long time after that. Her eyes did something complicated. "What is this called?" she said finally. "Lamb stew," Dario said. "Old recipe." She looked at the plate again. "It feels like something," she said. "I do not have a word for what it feels like." Dario turned back to the pot. "Most people don't," he said. "At first." Nith found Dario on a Tuesday, outside the materials lab, and handed him a folded printout without any greeting. Dario looked at it. It was dense. Numbers, molecular chains, a graph with 2 peaks highlighted in red. He understood about half of it. "What is this?" he said. "Evidence," Nith said. He sat down on the bench beside Dario without being invited. That was a Graylon thing. They did not wait for social permission when they had something to say. "I have been analyzing the compound data from last weekend. The smell produced by your cooking process released a significant quantity of volatile organic compounds. I ran them against the known neurochemical response profiles for the 12 species currently residing on floor 6. Dario waited. Nith pointed at the first red peak. "This is produced by the Maillard reaction. When you brown the meat, it triggers a response in the brain's reward pathway in Tulvari, Selene, Graylon, and 4 other species on that floor. The response is close to what those species experience from social bonding or from solving a complex problem." He pointed at the second peak. "This is from the spice combination, the cumin and coriander together. It triggers a mild alertness response in Varadi neurochemistry. That is why Rekha was in a bad mood all of Sunday." His brain was asking for something it did not get. Dario stared at the graph. You were telling me my cooking made Rekka angry because he would not come near it. Yes, Nith said simply. Your food is a neurochemical event. It produces compounds that affect the brain chemistry of most known species in ways that are measurable and consistent. It is, from a data perspective, one of the most efficient cross-species mood delivery systems I have encountered in my academic career. He paused. I am in my second year. Still, Dario said. Still, Nith agreed. Word moved the way word always moved in a place where people lived close together. Tavi told no one, but someone had seen her go into the kitchen and come out different. 2 Graylon students from the lounge mentioned to their lab partners that something had happened to their concentration on Saturday night, and they did not know why. Sarah said nothing to anyone, but was seen standing in the corridor again on Sunday at the same hour. By Thursday, there were 4 students sitting outside the kitchen door when Dario arrived to cook. He looked at them. They looked at him. He opened the door. He did not say anything about it. He just cooked more. He made a bean and smoked pepper dish his grandmother had taught him as a child. Dried beans soaked overnight, slow cooked with onion and 2 kinds of pepper, finished with a little vinegar at the end to lift the whole thing up. He made rice to go with it. He made enough for 12. By the time it was ready, there were 11 students in and around the kitchen. Tavi had her usual spot on the bench. 2 Graylon students sat on the floor with their slates in their laps, pretending to study. 3 Selene students stood near the door, technically in the corridor, technically not inside, which seemed to make them feel better about being there. Rekka was not there. Rekka had heard about the gathering and made a public point of calling it embarrassing. A primitive human had convinced a collection of supposedly advanced students to sit around and watch him heat things. He said this loudly in the main hall. A few students laughed. Fewer than had laughed before. Counselor Bravek heard about it on Friday. He did not find it funny. He did not find it embarrassing. He found it procedurally problematic. He sent a formal message to the dormitory administration office noting that an unsanctioned use of communal kitchen facilities for what he described as repeated large-scale biological substance preparation was occurring and that it raised questions about resource use, air quality management, and health compliance for multi-species living environments. He used the word unsanctioned 4 times in the message. The administration sent Dario a notice. It said the kitchen was available for personal use only and that gatherings of more than 4 individuals in the kitchen space were not permitted under current residential guidelines. Dario read the notice. He sent a reply asking where exactly the residential guidelines defined the kitchen as off-limits for cooking. He attached the relevant section of the residential handbook, which said the kitchen was available for personal food preparation without a time limit, and that the 4-person limit applied to social gatherings, not to people who happened to be in the corridor. The administration did not reply. Dario cooked again on Saturday. There were 15 people this time. 12 of them were technically in the corridor. He made flatbread again because Tavi had asked for it, quietly and without looking at him, which was how she asked for everything. He made it. He passed plates out through the kitchen door. Nith sat near the window with his data slate, quietly logging neurochemical observations on the assembled group. In his notes, he wrote, sample size increasing. Results consistent. Human food W. The notice from Dean Orvin arrived on a Wednesday and told Dario to appear before an academic conduct hearing on Friday at the 3rd hour of the afternoon session. The stated reason was unauthorized repeated use of communal facilities in a manner inconsistent with multi-species residential standards. Bravek's name was not on the notice, but it was in every line of it. Dario read it twice. Then he packed his kit and went to cook. On Friday, he arrived at the hearing room on floor 2. It was a formal space, gray walls, a long table at the front where Dean Orvin sat with 2 other administrators and Counselor Bravek. There were seats along the sides for observers. Those seats were full. Word had gotten around, the way it always got around at Orange 7, which was fast, and without anyone taking credit for it. Tavi was there. Nith was there with his slate already open. Sarah was there, seated in the back with her arms folded and her expression suggesting she had no particular reason for being present and had simply walked in by accident. Rekka was also there, standing near the wall, arms crossed, looking like he had come to watch something fail. Dean Orvin was a tall Tulvari with dark blue skin and the kind of careful eyes that came from spending years making decisions that affected people who disagreed with each other. She looked at Dario and said, "You have been given this hearing to respond to the concerns raised regarding your use of dormitory kitchen facilities. You may speak." Dario stood. He had thought about what to say. He had thought about citing the residential handbook, the lack of any specific rule he had broken, Nith's data, the history of human food culture, the scientific basis for the compounds his cooking produced. Instead, he said, "I would like to cook." Silence. Bravek made a short sound of contempt. Dean Orvin tilted her head. "You want to cook? Here." "Yes," Dario said. "I have my equipment. I have my ingredients. I am asking for 40 minutes and one table in this room. I want to make my argument with the thing being argued about." Bravek said, "This is not an appropriate use of a formal hearing. The student is being deliberately difficult." Dean Orvin looked at the room. She looked at the full observer seats. She looked at Bravek. She looked at Dario. She said, "You have 40 minutes." Bravek sat back with his jaw tight. Dario sat up at the side table. He had brought 3 dishes worth of ingredients. The lamb stew, because it was the first serious thing he had made here. The bean and smoked pepper dish, because it had brought 15 people to the corridor. And bread, because his grandmother had always said bread was the beginning of every conversation worth having. He worked quietly. He did not perform or explain or narrate what he was doing. He just cooked. The burner flame was low and steady. The onions went in first. The lamb came next. The spices went in, and the hearing room changed its quality of air within 4 minutes. People shifted in their seats. Someone near the back inhaled slowly and deeply and then looked around to see if anyone had noticed. Several people had noticed. They were doing the same thing. Tavi sat completely still with her eyes half closed. Nith wrote rapidly on his slate. Rekha, standing near the wall with his arms still crossed, moved his weight from one foot to the other. His nostrils, wide and flat, opened slightly. He made his face stay still, but his nostrils did what they did. Bravek sat straight. He did not move. He stared at a point on the wall and breathed through his mouth. At the 38-minute mark, Dario plated 3 small portions and carried them to the front table. He set one in front of Dean Orvin. He set one before the administrator on her left. He set the third in the center of the table. He went back and tore a length of flatbread and put it on a small board beside the dishes. He said, "This is what I have been making. You can make your decision after you eat or before. That is up to you." Dean Orvin looked at the bowl in front of her for a moment. Then she tore a piece of bread, pressed it into the stew, and ate it. The room was very quiet. She chewed slowly. She set the bread down. She picked it up again and took another piece. After a while she said, quietly, "What is this called?" "Lamb stew," Dario said. "Old recipe." 2 people in the observer seats started quietly crying and were visibly confused about it. Rekha uncrossed his arms. He looked at the bread board on the front table for a long moment. Then he walked forward, picked up a piece of flatbread, and walked back to the wall. He ate it standing up. He did not look at anyone. He did not say anything. He just ate, and then left the room while chewing and did not come back. Bravek did not eat anything. He sat with his hands flat on the table and said nothing. Dean Orvin wiped her hands on the cloth Dario had set beside the dishes. She looked at her 2 colleagues. Then she looked at Bravek. She said, "The conduct concerns are dismissed. I will be issuing a formal recognition of human culinary practice as a protected cultural discipline, to be noted in the academic registry by end of week." She paused. "Counselor Bravek, you are free to go." He went. Dario started packing up his kit. Tavi appeared at his elbow and began helping without being asked. Nith was already at the side table, leaning over the remaining portion of the stew and writing down everything his nose was telling him. Sarah walked past on her way out, stopped, looked at the pot, and said in a flat voice, "Is there any left?" It was not quite a question. Dario handed her a bowl. She took it and walked out without another word. He watched her go. Then he smiled at the empty room and started cleaning up. 12 weeks after the hearing, the waiting list for Dario's Saturday session had 41 names on it. He had moved out of the narrow dormitory kitchen 2 months ago. The academy had given him access to the large preparation room on level 3, the one used for practical biology labs during the week. On Saturdays, it became something else entirely. Long tables. Mismatched chairs brought in from 3 different common rooms. The smell of something slow cooking starting from mid-morning and lasting until the evening. It was the most attended voluntary gathering at Orange 7 Academy. Dario had not planned that. It had simply happened, the way things happen when you feed people, and they tell other people, and those people tell others, and at some point you are ordering twice the amount of dried beans you started with. Students brought things from home now. That had started around week 4, when a Selene student arrived with a bundle of dried purple herbs from her home region and asked, very shyly, if Dario could do anything with them. He could. He did. The smell was extraordinary. 3 Selene students had cried at the table, and 1 had sent a recorded message home about it. After that they kept coming with things. A Graylon student brought a root vegetable that smelled like earth and took 3 hours to soften properly. A pair of Variety students brought something that looked like a dense black seed and turned out to release a deep smoky flavor when toasted. Dario worked with everything. He made mistakes. He made corrections. He wrote down what worked. Sarah had become his most consistent presence in the preparation room. She had not announced this. She had simply started appearing on Saturday mornings while he was still setting up, asking what needed doing, and doing it without waiting for a full answer. She chopped things efficiently. She had strong hands for a Tulvari. She had never once said she enjoyed it. She came back every week. Nith published his paper in the 8th week. The full title was Thermal Transformation of Organic Compounds as a Vector for Cross-Species Emotional Synchronization, a preliminary study using human culinary methods at Orange 7. It was 32 pages. It had charts. It had the neurochemical data from 6 weeks of observations. It cited Dario's cooking process 14 times. It was cited by 42 other researchers within the first month of publication. 3 of them were from institutions that had never formally acknowledged human science before. Rekha ate at the table on week 6. He arrived late, when most of the seats were taken, found a spot at the far end, and ate quietly without speaking to anyone. He came back on week 7. On week 8, he sat near the middle. On week 9, he asked Sarah what was in the sauce. She told him. He nodded and had a second plate. He had not apologized to Dario. Dario had not asked him to. Some things resolve themselves without words. Dario had learned that from his grandmother too. Counselor Bravek sent a message on a quiet Thursday afternoon. It was brief. It said he had some time the following morning and wished to discuss the biochemical properties of the cooking process Dario used. It was formally worded in the way Bravek worded everything. Dario read it, and then made a pot of lentil soup that evening and left it in the cold unit overnight. When Bravek arrived the next morning, Dario reheated the soup, added a little lemon, set a bowl and a piece of bread on the table, and sat across from him. Bravek looked at the bowl. He said nothing about the hearing. He said nothing about the seminar or the chart or the word primitive. He picked up the spoon, ate the soup, and finished the bread, and sat quietly for a moment when the bowl was empty. Then he stood, said thank you in a voice that had lost some of its stone, and left. Dario washed the bowl and put it away. That Saturday, he called home after the session ended. The preparation room was still warm. A few students were still at the tables, talking in low voices or simply sitting in the kind of comfortable quiet that comes after a good meal. Tavi was asleep on a chair in the corner with her chin tucked down, which Dario had learned was how Selene slept when they felt safe somewhere. His grandmother answered on the second signal. Her kitchen was behind her. Yellow tiles. The old pot on the stove. He told her about the waiting list. He told her about the paper Nith had published. He told her about the students who brought their own ingredients from home and how he was running out of notebook pages writing down what worked and what did not. She listened the way she always listened, with her whole face. When he was done, she said, "And are you eating enough yourself?" He laughed. It was a real laugh, the kind that comes out before you plan it. "Yes," he said. She looked at him through the screen for a moment. Behind her, the pot was doing something slow and steady. The light in her kitchen was warm and yellow. She said, "I told you the food would work." He nodded. "You did. It always works," she said. "People are hungry everywhere. They just do not always know what for." He stayed on the call until she had to go check the pot. After she signed off, he sat for a while in the warm room with its smell of spices and bread, and around him, beings from 6 different star systems sat together in easy silence, full and quiet, and, for reasons that science was only beginning to measure, something very close to at home.